Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Good evening to everyone who's joined us today for another session of Daftarkhwan Insights. I'm Amna Javed, and I currently lead all things digital at Kamai. For those of you who don't know Kamai, we're in the business of making SME hiring in Pakistan faster, easier, and reliable. Today's session is brought to you by Daftarkhwan and Kamai. For over 4 years now, Daftarkhwan has been building an extraordinary community of entrepreneurs and professionals working on some really exciting business ideas in Pakistan. And through these insight sessions, they attempt to learn from some of the most brilliant professionals across all walks of life and seek guidance from their experiences. Our topic of discussion today is one that is very close to my heart personally, and I think we need a lot more conversations around this topic. And because despite all the work in women's rights that has happened in the past few decades, there's still a whole bunch of gender disparity in the professional world. And that is exactly what we'll be discussing today. The glass ceiling and the discrimination that women face at the workplace, and what individuals and organizations can do to sort of improve the situation and play their role in breaking this glass ceiling that exists. So, without making you wait any longer, I will quickly move on to introduce my guests for the evening. So, my first guest, Isha Saeed, is currently an MBA candidate at Harvard, and she has had a brilliant corporate career so far, from working at GSK to BAT and then to Pepsi. She will definitely be talking about her professional journey, but before that, I'd like to welcome my second guest for the evening, Shaheera Syed, who is currently working with Democracy Reporting International and has been in the policy sector since almost 7 years now. Thank you, both of you, for joining us on an incredibly busy Monday. It's wonderful to have you here. Do you want to say hi?
Thanks for having us here.
Great. So I'm really excited for today's discussion, and more so because it's always wonderful having brilliant women like yourselves on the panel. And I hope the following discussion will leave us all refreshed for the coming week. So before we move on to some very tough questions, would you be kind enough to sort of very briefly introduce yourselves to our audience? Isha, can you go first?
Yes, sure. So you've already given like a brief introduction, but basically I am a LUMS 2014 graduate. Then I was working in various marketing and sales roles from GSK to then Pakistan Tobacco Company, which is British American Tobacco, and then PepsiCo. And now I'm an MBA candidate at Harvard Business School, and I'm currently on a summer placement at a management consulting firm in Dubai, and excited to discuss the topic today.
Perfect. Thank you. Shaheera, would you go next, please?
Right. So my name is Shaheera, as you already mentioned. I graduated from NUST back in 2014. Then I started my career in the development sector. I've worked with a number of organizations in different capacities. Some of them were full-time roles, some of them were consultancies. I started off from Worldwide Fund for Nature. Then I did a consultancy project for the government of Pakistan, in which I worked with the Foreign Affairs Committee of Pakistan, and currently I'm working with Democracy Reporting International, with which I've been involved with over 3 years, and I was working at their Berlin office for 1 year before I joined their Pakistan office.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you for sharing your journeys. I know there's very little time and you can go into details, but I think the most logical way for us to begin the discussion would be to try and understand our topic a little bit better. So time and again, we see and hear about the significant progress that we've made towards equality, equity, diversity, all of those things in the workplace. But even today, we see a lot of people, especially women and minority groups, being unfairly blocked from advancing in their careers. So वो promotion के लिए बहुत ideal candidates होंगे, उनकी qualifications बहुत relevant होंगी, उनका बहुत extraordinary experience होगा, but then all of a sudden you see some less competent co-worker, all of a sudden वो overtakes them, right? So I'd like to ask you and know from you, how is it that you define the glass ceiling, and do you think this is a form of discrimination at the workplace? Isha, would you go first?
Okay. So for me, I think it's a the glass ceiling can be defined in multiple ways, but for me, a good way of defining it is that it's a barrier, an invisible or perhaps a very visible barrier that has not been broken by women before us. So we haven't seen women go beyond that level. It could be a job grade, it could be a certain pay grade, a certain level of compensation, a certain managerial role. This differs industry to industry, but basically it's in a systemic problem, and this could be because of certain practices, it could be because of certain policies or unconscious bias that exists, but basically it's the lack of women beyond a certain level, and that I define as a glass ceiling. And yeah.
So, Shahira, since I think the glass ceiling is a term that's typically associated with the corporate world, right, and corporate sector. So, do you think the same principles apply to the public sector as well, or there's a sort of difference?
I think this, I know that this term is actually usually used in the corporate sector, but working in the development sector, you also see it everywhere. Although it's like a concept which we define as glass ceiling, but if you look at it happening around, you might not actually recognize it as glass ceiling. But when you read about it and learn about it, you realize like what the underlying problems are. So this is very, very prevalent in the development sector as well. And you see that women are also discriminated as they are in corporate sector and in other sectors, because after all, we are living as part of the society which is predominantly patriarchal, and as a result of that culture, different areas and different jobs that we take up, they're impacted. So yes, this is also very prevalent in the development sector. You might be passed up for different job roles, you might be passed up for certain promotions, or you might be limited to certain roles because you're a woman, and that's all what they see you as good for.
So, like Isha mentioned, that this could also be the result of a long-standing bias. So, my next question would be: so, when you both were growing up, so were you told what career choices you can make and what would be more suitable to you based on your gender, like lawyer na bano, doctor ban jao, engineer ban ke kya karogi, that sort of thing? So, Isha.
So for me, I was the first person in my family, man or woman, like boy or girl at that point in time, to go into the corporate sector. And yes, there were obviously the like predominantly, I think women in many Pakistani families tend to go towards the medical field. However, I was lucky enough not to have any pressure to join any of those, but because my sisters had already gone, one had become a doctor, the other one had joined the development sector. So, and there was nobody in my family who had joined the corporate sector or was aware of the kind of, work policies there or the kind of work environment there. So, yes, I was the first one. There is definitely, and being the first one has its own challenges, and blind spots that you might fall prey to. So, yeah, there was no pressure, but definitely I didn't really have a role model to look up to or anybody who could guide me in terms of, what the requirements would be or what to expect.
Shahira, was it
Unfortunately,
different?
I, unfortunately, I wasn't as lucky as Isha was. I actually was really pushed hard into the medical field, and my mother really wanted me to become a doctor, and that was kind of like her lifelong dream. But that's something that didn't resonate with me, and that's not an area which I was actually interested in. And there are not a lot of women who actually opt for development sector in our family, because that's seen as something which not women from good families actually opt for. And that was very confusing to me, because that's just, I don't relate to it, I don't understand it. If you're working towards the development policies of a country and for the betterment of the country, what better job could there be? But there are like these deep standing perceptions within our society about what women who work in the development sector are like, and these are usually negative connotations or perceptions, and that was also in my family, because of which I had to face a little bit of resistance, but then they actually came around it.
So both of you would think that occupational segregation is real, and it could be a result of this sort of जो आपकी एक cultural upbringing होती है कि so if a girl is going to get up one day and say, oh, I'm going to be an athlete, the whole world would look at her like, yeah, alien, whatever to be. So they don't generally consider that, oh, she can be an athlete. So do you think that if this is a sort of cultural thing, it plays into when all these children, they grow up and they go into professional roles, and then when they are in decision making roles, all of this plays out, and that's
It
something
does.
that causes that barrier?
It does. If, for example, you have three girls in a family, the first two or the first one is definitely, there is a tick mark that has to be, a checkbox that had to be ticked in terms of making one of them a doctor or the other one an engineer or something along the lines of your expectation is that you want to join something or some professional that is going to give you a good work-life balance. So a lot of the younger girls in my family do look at the kind of hours that I work, and they do think about, they are brought up thinking that there are certain professions they should be joining. So that definitely exists, and you'll it's tough to find families in Pakistan that don't have one female doctor at least.
I think
So
another
Shahira,
factor kind of like, sorry, I was just going to like
yeah, yeah,
add on
no,
to
go
what
ahead.
Isha was saying is
Yeah,
that another factor which gets added to this is that there are less role models as well. If you've seen someone working in a particular field, excelling and actually being happy with the work that they're doing, you look up to those people. And if you don't have that many examples in the family, for one reason or another, it actually becomes very difficult to convince your immediate family, your friends, and even sometimes yourself when you're having certain doubts about whether this is like the right choice for you or not. It becomes difficult if you don't have other people around who you can relate to and maybe perhaps take advice from. So that just piles on to like the load of problem that women actually have to face in the society.
and in addition to this sort of एक जो cultural barrier exist करता है, what sort of discriminatory practices or policies do you think exist that disproportionately affect women in the workplace, and they indirectly also contribute to the existing of this class ceiling?
I think this is the big question,
Yeah.
and perhaps I can try answering this in, like, if I divide the entire journey into three or four sections. One is the sourcing of the candidate and hiring. The other is your onboarding, training. The next one is going to be the person actually performing and doing the job. And the last one, perhaps, is progressing. So, different practices and different policies exist on each level. And I think what's most important before we go into what policies and all, and we'll come to that later as well, perhaps, is कि policies or practices में बहुत बड़ा difference है. Policies can exist in the corporate sector. There are, especially as lots of MNCs, many MNCs exist in Pakistan, there are policies in place, but practices change होते होते time लगता है. So starting with the first stage, I think सबसे बड़ा point ये है कि आपको कितने हायरिंग मैनेजर वो किस लेवल तक पुश करेगा या करेगी कि उसके पास मेल और फीमेल रेज्यूमेज जो हैं वो इक्वल प्रोपोर्शन में आए या एटलीस्ट कुछ रिप्रेजेंटेशन हो. फिर उसके अलावा जब वो फिल्टर होंगे तो जब हायरिंग हो रही है, हाउ अनबायस्ड इज द इंटरव्यूअर and in terms of evaluating the candidate. So practices are different, policies are different, and at each stage थोड़ी different होती जाती हैं. So policies may exist, but at the end of the day, the point to notice is that the implementation is done by predominantly men. So that is also like a little bit of a conundrum or dilemma that we exist with.
Shahira, is there something that you would like to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say that like in the development sector we also see this problem कि policies भी हमेशा exist नहीं करती हैं. तो आपका starting point ही बहुत पीछे है. पहले you have to convince like the higher management of why it is even important to have certain policies in place. और I feel like कि ये वाला थोड़ा सा जो है वो problem you run into है that what is a policy on a paper good for, this is something that we do anyway. So there's also like this non-serious attitude towards these things, and they usually counter with questions like, but you don't think that our organization is like this, and they kind of put you on the spot, and at that point it becomes very difficult to kind of navigate that conversation. And just adding on to what Isha was saying earlier कि अगर आप इसको different stages के ऊपर भी देखो, उसके अंदर even if अगर you ensure कि 50% of the CVs are a female candidates and 50% 90% of the CVs are for male candidates. Even in the hiring committee, अब आपके पास equal representation है लोगों की कि नहीं है, that also becomes a challenge. और अगर एक ऐसी organization है जहाँ पे if there are 10 employees and only 2 female employees, you're not going to overburden them with all the hiring process either. So it's a very slow process, and अगर इन policies को हम implement करने भी लग जाएं तो I think it is going to take a long time, and for one reason or another organizations sometimes lack the patience or maybe like the motivation to undertake these very huge challenges, or वो internal कभी कभार resistance इतनी ज़्यादा आती है that they also kind of like avoid that level of confrontation and they don't really go into it as well.
Yeah.
So, you guys, do you feel that if, like, let's for example just start about like starting from the hiring stage, okay? So, do you think the large part of responsibility lies with the manager there? So, for example, I can give you an example. We were hiring for this role, and the HR manager who was responsible, they told us outright that we're not going to hire any female candidates for this role. Okay? So that is something that you experience in a lot of sort of jobs जब भी आप hire करने जा रहे हैं, so आपको वो शुरू करने से पहले वो आपको बताते हैं कि sorry, we have no room for females and we don't want to hire females from this role, because they're going to say कि the environment will not suit them, right? And they don't take the responsibility of actually making or creating that environment suitable for the woman. So you think that like a large part of responsibility lies with that manager, जहाँ से ये सारी चीज शुरू हो रही है?
I think it does. Taking a step back, there's also research that shows in other countries, and I'm sure you can extend that to Pakistan as well, that women tend to not apply for roles in the first place because they feel as if ये role मेरे लिए नहीं है. Whereas men would apply to more roles even if they feel हाँ I don't have 5 out of the 10 qualities required or skills required, but I'll still apply. So एक तो वो issue होता है that women generally lack the confidence. फिर हमारी job descriptions भी कितनी clear हैं कितनी unclear हैं, that is also a different issue कि असल requirement क्या होती है ये कहीं भी नहीं लिखा होता. But apart from that, I have seen it in my own career as well. I have been very fortunate, but there have been instances where I've known that the hiring manager actually wants a man. And why is that? That is because the previous person that I will be replacing, it was a man. So unki aapas ki camaraderie, unka aapas mein way of working, there's obviously some discomfort that the manager will have to go through in order to start working with a woman. So wahan pe manager ke upar zyada, and they don't, considering how the corporate sector works and the kind of hours that we work, that takes a lot of time and effort, and maybe they don't want to put in a lot of effort. But then, yes, to answer your question, एक तो औरतें pipeline में थोड़ी कम होती हैं. B, the hiring managers also have a lot of responsibility, and I think HR का बहुत बड़ा role है. That HR needs to be part of the process. And that is very important because sales के roles में, marketing के role में, a lot of these, HR needs to be part of the process to really evaluate objectively. Jin companies mein HR is also part of the process, they can probably check the unconscious bias that might be coming through the hiring manager.
Shaheera?
Just adding on to what Isha was saying, I think the responsibility, heavily relies with the hiring managers, because that is kind of like the starting point where women have the opportunity to actually enter the workforce. So अगर आप उसी point के ऊपर वो biases or which constraints नहीं हटाएंगे, इसका मतलब है they're not even going to make it to the first cut. और वो फिर organization के culture को women friendly किस तरह बनाना है, that's step 2. That's something which we can kind of tackle together once we are part of the workforce, once we are part of the discourse, and once we are part of actually like the overall organization ka culture. But before that, if you're not even like part of any job or an organization, so from the outside you can't really do that much. There are some organizations which actually specifically write sentences that women are especially encouraged to apply, but I also have an issue with those kind of things because मुझे लगता है वो सिर्फ cosmetic purposes के लिए लिखी जाती हैं चीजें, but वो असल में practice के अंदर कितनी implement हो रही हैं, तो we also need like a lot of monitoring and evaluation of HR processes as well. One thing that we kind of have started doing is that if you really want women to apply, and if we see that women candidates are not applying for a particular position, तो अगर हम for instance अगर social media के ऊपर कोई post डाल रहे होंगे, तो we would actually boost it and target women as an audience in order to make sure that at least women are seeing that post who have access to social media. So these are like the little things that you can do, but it's a start nonetheless.
So, going back to my previous question, in like how Isha segregated all of these biases at different stages in the organization. So, where do you think barriers exist at like when you're sourcing candidates, when they're progressing to a new role, and all of those things? Where do you think is it most prevalent? जब आप hire कर रहे हैं या when the woman is actually at the workplace?
So hiring, I think, is a baseline. वो तो मसला है ही. But I think progression is also an issue. Especially in the corporate sector, the biggest issue is that we just don't have enough women at the top. And that also means a managerial role, assistant manager to perhaps manager and then senior manager, the turnover increases. Now, that could be because of our cultural issues or the life stages of the different women who are in the workforce. But that has वहाँ सबसे बड़ा बैरियर जो है वो है कि आपको किस किस्म के प्रोजेक्ट्स मिले, योर एक्सेस टू डिफरेंट लर्निंग अपॉर्चुनिटीज, हाउ योर मैनेजर वाज इन्वॉल्व्ड, व्हाट योर कंपेटिटिव सेट इज, कि आप किसके अगेंस्ट compete करो. और सबसे इम्पॉर्टेंट चीज़ जो है वो नेटवर्क्स हैं. When you are consistently working in a team of just men, you don't have an access to a network of women. So women at the top who can pull other women up, women around you, ताकि आप उनसे you can understand. Networking is a very very important part of any kind of job. तो जब आपके वो networks नहीं है, तो how do you lobby for, or how do you find sponsors for yourselves? So I think male dominated networks, and then finding your own network, the role of sponsors who can advocate for you in those meetings जहाँ promotions वगैरह decide होती हैं. Those, I feel, that is very important, because जब उस phase से ही आगे लड़कियां नहीं जाएंगी, या women aren't able to progress beyond that, how are they going to pull other women up? So I feel like hiring is important, but वो level बहुत ज़्यादा important है कि how do you make them into managers who can thrive.
And Shahira, do you think that there have been instances, or can you recall any instances where you felt that you were supported by your organization or your manager? Because I think you have mostly worked in an area where there's just men, right? And they are the ones that you look up to support for. See? So how is it that you've navigated that landscape?
I can think of like a couple of examples where I have not been supported, but since we're not talking about that, I will just quote like the good examples.
No, because all of us know that we're like 90% of the times it's very tough to find support in an organization, and Isha's already mentioned that, which is why I want to know the flip side as well.
The organization that I'm actually currently working in, I think it has like one of the best cultures as far as I am concerned, and as far as like the kind of experience that I've had with organizations. Our managers are very, very vigilant. They know what kind of issues that you have. They always have time for you. If you come to them with an issue, not only will they listen to it, but they'll also make sure that they will come up with a solution for that issue as well. So those kind of things actually help you in order to find a place at the work, and also kind of create an environment where you feel like if you bring up an issue, that will be taken care of, that you will be listened to responsibly. And yeah, that's the overall culture is just very conducive. And if you want to leave, for instance, nobody will ask you what the leave is for, which I think is like a very, very predominant culture within Pakistan. If you are staying late for a particular event, the transport is actually arranged for you. And I don't think those kind of things are actually part of the equation for like a lot of organizations, and they're not vigilant about it, and with unknowingly they're actually kind of creating constraints for other people. But that's kind of like the little examples that I can think of. And also, of course, like when you are in meetings and presenting ideas, you're giving an equal chance to actually voice your opinion about things as your male counterparts. So those are like just some of the things that actually increase your confidence and boost your confidence to actually also think that you can deliver and apply for those promotions, and you're actually not discriminated. And like quite the opposite actually, that my boss every now and then comes up and tells me about this opportunity that I can apply to, that opportunity that I can apply to, and that's very different from the other organizations that I've worked at.
Yeah, I think I'll just add to Shaheera as well. Considering that I've worked at 3 of the bigger MNCs in Pakistan, I've also been very, very fortunate to have very, very solid, DEI initiatives in the organization, yeah, gender policies. So, लेकिन predominantly आपकी सारा corporate sector ऐसा नहीं होगा. So I was very, very fortunate because I had sponsors, male sponsors, and I had line managers who were men across the board, but they were very, very supportive. लेकिन since we are talking about, predominant culture, so वो थोड़ा different होगा. And there's also another element of, how vocal are ladies themselves in terms of asking for those things, and that kind of burden is not something everybody wants to carry. So yeah, just to build on Shahira's, I've also been like fortunate enough to be surrounded by really, really supportive line managers and also good policies that I was aware of and could bank on. लेकिन बहुत दफ़ा आपको ये पॉलिसीज़ का नहीं पता होता, या आपको अपनी राइट्स का खुद नहीं पता होता, या यू नॉट अवेयर ऑफ दोज थिंग्स, या आपके पास वो स्पॉन्सर्स नहीं होते to who can pitch for you.
Yes, if
So
I
I will
can add one
definitely
more
come
thing.
back to, yeah, please go ahead.
I was just going to add one more thing. The nature of like most of the work in development sector is that either you're working with the government bureaucrats के साथ आप काम करोगे, government departments के साथ काम करोगे, या फिर आप MPAs, MNAs के साथ काम करोगे. Now you can implement certain policies and practices within your organization, and that's fine, and that's like you have a clear accountability. But once you step out of your organization and you're predominantly networking and dealing with other people who are not a part of your organization, and also people of influence, people that you would think twice bringing anything up with, quite frankly, let alone a complaint, तो वहाँ पर और ज़्यादा important होता है कि आपकी अपनी organization का culture क्या है, कि if somebody else does something which makes you uncomfortable, can you actually go back to your colleagues and talk about it? More often than not, there isn't something that we can do, but that's kind of like been an ongoing debate at an organization. If you have an issue with a politician who's, for instance, a sitting MPA, that can you actually file or lodge a complaint or not? But then again, if you are just starting out in your career, those are not the kind of battles that you want to pick up, unfortunately. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying that that's something which doesn't happen. And even after working for like 6-7 years in the sector, I don't think I will be in a position to pick up that battle either. So I'm just trying to like kind of paint a picture that even if like you have all those like practices, rigorous policies at the organization, you cannot actually implement them overall unless there's a societal shift in terms of how we view women in public spaces, how we see women in particular sectors, that it be development or corporate. And then overall, unless there's an overall shift, I think we can only do so much. But then again, it's a start anyway.
So I'll come back to supportive managers in a bit, but Shaheera, you mentioned that your organization is very supportive, and so was Isha. So, and like, if there's a late sitting, they'd arrange for transport and all of those things. So, given both of your experiences, I'd like to know how big of a contributor do you think this anytime, anywhere culture is to this glass ceiling that women face? Because honestly, sort of, for example, if I look at my role, Isha's role, and Shaheera's role, we're always somehow connected to work. Kabhi kuch ho raha hai, kabhi kuch ho raha hai. So you can't really disconnect, right? And then to be able to stay connected to work for such a long time, you need a very supportive environment at home and outside, right? So if you're at home, then there's family, and they're like taking care of a lot of things. So which is why then you can just connect with work. And there's lots of people who may not have that privilege. So how big of a role do you think that this plays in this glass ceiling that women face? Because we all know women have a lot of responsibility outside of the workplace as well. Shaheera, do you want to go first?
Should I start, or is Isha going to go first?
Go ahead,
Isha can go first.
Okay, so I think it plays a huge part because I feel like the entire concept of, think leader, think male, a lot of it has to come from that person is in tuned or is logged in 24/7. And that concept, when we think of a leader, we think about someone who's very, very enthusiastic, is always just focusing on this. And we haven't seen a precedent of a woman. We haven't seen many women being in CEO roles or C-suite roles.
Yeah.
So people in the organization are not used to seeing women leaders who have balanced their lives in a certain way, or for example, want to leave at 6 o'clock and then perhaps log on later. So एक तो precedent का मतलब है that people have not been exposed to that. Then secondly, mindset, that bus this is like that, the leader is enthusiastic, he's always, or she is always signed in, they're always going to be available. So when you do try to set your own hours, there are quite a few times where it's perceived as either a lack of enthusiasm or laziness, or just that you're coming up with excuses. And then the person who steps in, which is more likely to be a man on the team who will probably do that work, or has to and can perhaps give in that time, so वो आपको फिर एक level playing field नहीं रहती है उस तरह. So it is a huge impediment. And I think more managers who come in, more female managers who will try to do things differently, you will necessarily see a shift, because then people will become used to people leaving on time and things changing.
And before Shahira gives her opinion on this, would you also want to add how this has changed post COVID now? Because everyone was working from home, managing multiple duties at a time. And, initially everyone thought, no, if they're going to stay at home, they're not going to work. And then everyone had to work from home.
Yes.
So
yes. There
has
were a
that
lot
helped
of
change
roles.
perception?
Yes, there were quite a few roles that required quite a bit of travel. या फिर we had very very qualified females who wanted to apply, लेकिन they required a change in city. Now those jobs could easily have been done remotely as well, लेकिन वो concept नहीं था. And then also perhaps there are a couple of, today I have a few tasks that I can do from home, or I want to work from home today. I have some other things to take care of and I can manage from home. लेकिन वो concept नहीं था. And that COVID is changing, and that brings a lot of agility and a lot of mobility that women do need. So that is definitely going to change. A lot of phone calls that were meetings in person, a lot of meetings that were in person are now going to be online, and that is going to bring a lot of mobility for women.
Shahira, what's your take?
I think Isha has covered like main of like kind of like all the main points regarding this, but I would just like vein on this कि मुझे तो ये I am anytime anywhere वाला work culture वैसे ही समझ नहीं आता, regardless of like the gender thing. I think it's actually not that healthy. If you look at like developed countries and the progressive countries, they're talking about reducing the work hours and workload, or condensing like the work week as well. And studies have shown it increases the productivity as well. Employees are more motivated. But I think Pakistan के अंदर अभी हमें काफी ज्यादा टाइम लगेगा वहां पहुंचने के लिए, तो unfortunately we have to like make do with the situation. Sometimes I think it's also कि वो exacerbate करके भी थोड़ा सा बताते हैं, और वो बहुत exaggerate कर रहे होते हैं कि आपको जो है वो ज्यादा देर रुकना पड़ेगा, what not, in order to already kind of like put this into your head कि you might not be like ready for this role, or to make you doubt yourself. या फिर अगर आपको कभी महीने में एक दफा you might have to stay back, but it is portrayed as if that's a huge part of your job. And there are certain people, I don't know what they get out of it, but this is kind of like the predominant culture कि women को they like to put them down, कि आपसे तो ये काम नहीं होगा. Or maybe like there are certain kinds of like networking events, they're usually in the evening, and certain women cannot go to those. So by nature of like the way networking happens within this country, and certain events happen हमारे work culture के अंदर, I think that also kind of like increases kind of the impediments that women face. But like Isha said, कि COVID के बाद I think a lot of cultural shift is happening, that mental shift, I think जिसको भी शायद बहुत साल लगने थे, we are actually like on the verge of that. The people are thinking that if you're sitting and working from home, that doesn't mean that you're lazing around, you actually work. But उसका I think थोड़ा सा negative impact ये हुआ है कि you are expected to be online all the time. पहले भी ये था कि with your cell phones, if you have like work email on your phone, you're kind of like constantly responding back. But now after COVID, अगर आप घर हैं तो आप घर में काम भी कर सकते हैं. So work hours का concept थोड़ा सा जो है वो dilute हो गया. And within the culture जहाँ पे everybody wants to show that they're online all the time, and somehow that's a parameter of productivity, वहाँ पे थोड़ा सा difficult हो जाता है for women to always be online and be available for whatever the work requires them to do.
Yeah, and I think
yeah, go ahead.
The concept of double burden, that women intrinsically carry the double burden in terms of caring, like responsibilities at home and then responsibilities at work. वो double burden का recognition जो है वो बहुत मुश्किल है, especially if you're an unmarried woman. तो वो it's presumed that you don't have that burden, whereas there will be systemic issues that will
Yeah.
keep a woman from staying at work at 11. uh, the security situation in the country is not our doing. That is a general like वो issue है. So उस किस्म का एक empathy बहुत important है, which I think is kind of lacking. But
Lacking.
I think that kind of work-life balance should be spread across the board. It should be easily accessible to both men and women. And it kind of makes you feel really, really bad. And वो burden औरतों के ऊपर आ जाता है कि why are you leaving earlier? Whereas, by the way, in my experience, a lot of women show up on time at work and want to end on
You
time as well.
absolutely do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're nearing almost the end of time, so I'd like to move towards closing the topic. So, one, I'd like you to talk just a little about what does it take to be a woman in a predominantly male role, and you've talked about this a bit before as well. And what sort of advice do you have for women, especially those who are in the early part of their careers? What can they do to navigate all these situations that you mentioned? Like they should be more vocal, but like Shahira said, there are instances when you're engaging with someone else outside your organization, तो वहाँ पे आप there's just a limit जहाँ तक आप vocal हो सकते हैं. Then you, like in most instances, what happens is women end up accepting, और वो बस I think यही होता है कि अच्छा ठीक है, I can't do anything about it, and you just accept whatever's happening.
Shahira, do you
Isha?
want to go first? I
I
want
can
Shahira to
start.
go first.
You both always go opposite of who I want to talk first. So,
We're mixing
Let's
it
go.
up. I think the first and foremost thing is you need to have a thick skin. I don't want to scare any women who are just entering the workforce, but in order to step out of your home, work, I think you just, and even study or do anything, I think as many women would already know, you need to have like a thick skin. And then also that just focus on your work. That would be my advice, that there's a lot which is happening around. You'll come across many people who try to demotivate you. There are many people who will support you, but that shouldn't actually determine your self-worth or your capacity to perform or be productive. You should have that already, and just keep your head down, focus on your work, especially in the early part of your careers. You don't want to get into like all the other things which are happening around, and just focus on your work, improve your skill sets, and at the same time, do not have any kind of like preconceived notions about what the work culture is going to be, because I don't want people who are listening to this also be overly negative about, oh ये तो काम के ऊपर इतने ज़्यादा मसले मसाले होते हैं तो हमने तो जाना ही नहीं है, and kind of like get scared of it. It might be that your organization is amazing, और वो amazing होगी किस तरह, as more and more people who are progressive and open minded join that organization and be part of that culture. Every single person who's a part of the organization is making the culture eventually. So just focus on that. Focus on networking and having women allies. Focus on having men allies as well, because उसमें आपको वो bifurcate करने की जरूरत नहीं है. But it's actually just good to talk to other women who have gone through like similar experiences and how they actually navigated those situations. So talk to people, have an open mind, and like I said, just focus on your work and improving your skill set, and I think the rest just comes through.
and eventually, when you progress, so you get that voice that you initially it was the start of your career. You feel that is lacking. कि आप किसी को वापस बता नहीं सकते that I don't agree with this or I don't appreciate with this. So eventually, then you build up that confidence as well, I guess.
I think you can make a difference in little capacity anyway. Pehle din jaakar, you're not going to change like the overall organization culture as well. I think it's also like your perception about change as well. आप पहले दिन जाके ये तो नहीं कह सकते कि I'm going to introduce like a gender and diversity policy. I have no experience in it, but I have very strong opinions about it. That doesn't work. That doesn't work about anything. You first have to show your credibility, prove yourself as someone who's an asset and valuable person to the organization. Once you have established that, you can make certain changes here and there. And like I said, I mean, by virtue of belonging to an organization, you're formating that culture. So अगर आपसे कोई इस तरह की बात करते हैं जो आपको पसंद नहीं आती, you can just correct that person and make sure that they don't talk about that thing in a particular way. And there are little things that you can do on an everyday basis. I believe the change doesn't have to be that grand level of like overarching change. It can happen on an everyday basis as well, and it's equally important.
Yeah.
Isha, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think I'll speak from the corporate sector side. I think I'll mention 3 or four or five things. So, number one, especially if you want to work in the corporate sector, your family needs to be on board with it. You need a supportive circle around you, personal circle, because corporate sector is not going to be your 9 to 5 jobs. They are going to be very different, especially if you want to progress. So supportive family is very important, and that is not easy. You will probably have to build that over time. But secondly, awareness. When I was joining back in 2014, I feel like we had half the resources that we have right now in order to build our own awareness on what our rights are, what kind of policies a company should have, and to ask for those policies. There is ways of finding that out, and there are ways of negotiating those. I have friends who are working in the same companies that I've worked for, and they're asking for those policies because, for example, they're becoming mothers and they didn't have as many mothers in those departments. So, find out those policies, speak to other women, and try to push for those policies. The third thing is be very clear about the expectations, about asking for feedback. Research shows that male line managers find it difficult to give feedback, but women also like shy away from getting, they want feedback, but wo conversations aapas mein karna is very important, and being very very clear in terms of what is expected. The most important thing is that in the corporate sector, in any sector, but in the corporate, I can speak on behalf of my experiences. Women tend to be very modest in selling their work. More I, less we can work a lot for women, especially because you need to sell yourself. You need to sell the projects that you've done, your achievements. And सबसे important जो चीज़ है वो ये है that support each other. If you see somebody else, some other woman going through something or advocating for something, I have seen a lot of women shy away from supporting each other. And once you become a manager, make sure that next time you're hiring for a position, you source as many female candidates as possible as well. You advocate for them and you look out for the younger women in your organization. And last, जो मेरे लिए बहुत important था, and I think Shahira's covered it, was sponsors. And unfortunately, I didn't have role models who were female. That is the biggest conundrum. And I hope to become a role model for others, but male sponsors are very very important, and those were absolute game changers for me in terms of so finding those sponsors is very important. With the corporate sector, it's a game that you have to be very very careful, like very deliberate in playing, and planning it out. So yeah, that's my advice for
So you
surviving and
both
thriving.
have pretty much talked about what Isha has mentioned clearly, what sort of responsibilities do women in leadership have, but what sort of do you think role can men play in promoting the development and success of their female colleagues? Because we know it's men who are primarily in decision making roles, या उनके पास उतनी power होती है in a boardroom to influence a decision. So what are the sort of things, or what's the most effective way that they can play a role in this?
I think tone at the top is very, very important. The organizations that have a singular, like clear vision and articulation, and they repeat that stance that we are going for a more equitable organization in terms of gender diversity and access for all minorities. वो organizations ज़्यादा अपने stance को actually execute करती हैं. And I think what's also important is that if men see other men putting other women down, it's very important to take a stand and stop that kind of conjecture right there and then. So उस किस्म का actually letter in spirit में उस policy को या execute करना और consistently execute करना और advocate करना is what men can do best. And then generally pitching the women in their teams and looking out for them, that's very important.
I think I'll just add like a small bit to it. Empathy goes a long way. Just sometimes like listening to the problems of women and just understanding their perspective rather than just trying to solve problems all the time. More often than not, you just want to talk about certain things, and just understanding where women are coming from. So if it's a new mother at an organization and trying to navigate that situation, which an organization which doesn't have like a good paternity policy or something, just understanding the situation and seeing what you as a person can do, that's step one. And then if you are in that position where you can advocate for like a change please do so. So those are like the little things I think that you can actually do. But I think that empathy kind of like comes at top for me, that just listening and trying to understand where women are coming from and being really like genuine in their responses.
Thank you. So I think we're before we move on to questions, just one last question that I have for you both. So, how have both of you attempted to sort of give back and create paths for women a bit easier? Like even your roles, you're both in managerial roles, and I'm sure there's more women coming in every day. So, Isha, do you want to start?
Yeah, I
Very
think
briefly.
very briefly, make sure that there is a talent pipeline of other women who can follow in your footsteps. That's most important. Secondly, if one woman is trying to fight for something, support her. Don't put her down in your, debate, like discussions with other people at work. Even if you disagree, taking a stand is very, very important. And calling out things, being vocal, is very, very important. And that kind of sets the precedent.
Yeah, I
Shahira?
think that just adding to that, I mean, just making sure that if a hiring process is being done, that if you can say something or do something, just to make sure that more the job opportunity actually reaches out to more women. So, for instance, if we are organizing like any event, we make sure that it's not a male, and then there is women representation. I'm kind of like the gender and diversity mainstreaming focal point at the organization. So before every event, I'm the person who's actually making sure everything is fine. And then since I also look after like communications, so we really make sure that our language is also very gender neutral, and I think that goes a long way. And that's something that process which takes a lot of time, but as you do it and you do it at a consecutive basis, people start to get sensitized about it. We really make sure that if any woman is joining an organization, to give her like the space and time to adjust, but also if they have any kind of like problems, then always being there for them. And since I'm at the position where I have been working for this organization for quite some time, so I can actually take up certain issues where a person who has just joined the organization cannot. So I make sure that I use that platform to the fullest. And overall, just being very sensitive of the culture. If somebody says something, I kind of have developed the skill of actually stopping or confronting that person in that very moment. And that is something which has taken a long, long time for a person who's very non-confrontational as I am. But just making sure that you're looking out for like other women who are joining the organization.
Thank you. I think those were some really great points. So, in case anyone who is watching has any questions for our guests, please feel free to type them out and we'll take them. And while we wait for some questions, do you guys have any parting thoughts that you'd like to share on what is it that organizations specifically as a whole can do to sort of address this? Because individuals, we've spoken about what can organizations as a whole do about this situation. And in case, in the meanwhile, someone else has any questions, please, you can type them out in the chat. Isha, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think there's definitely need for affirmative action because at this point in time, we do not have enough women in management, and we definitely do not have enough women in the C-suite. And if the West is going to take anything like up to 100 years to correct that imbalance, so we definitely need that in Pakistan, and that's very important. So affirmative action is one. Secondly, small things like transportation, work from home policies, and paternity leave as well as maternity leave. Those are things that are very, very important. So I feel those. And third is, making sure that you give women, adequate opportunities in terms of trainings, male mentors or mentors anyway, sponsors, उस किस्म की चीज़ें are very important. As well as I'll also make a huge plea कि all the women who are in the corporate sector, plan for your MBAs, try to upskill, even if you can do it online or any of the courses. अगर आपका if your workplace is not giving you those opportunities, seek them out online. And we're all available on LinkedIn as well. These opportunities, these networks, build those informal networks, and hopefully women in Pakistan can network with each other to equip each other to pull them out.
Yeah, just adding
Shahira,
on to that,
anything?
policies, एक तो सबसे पहले if your organization doesn't have like a gender and diversity mainstreaming policies, have that in place. Then to make it, have an action plan about it as well. Then constant refreshers, because these are things which are not just going to happen overnight. So if you have weekly meetings and you can include a gender and diversity update as a part of your weekly sessions, I think that's one good way of making sure that that's something which doesn't slip off the agenda, which conveniently happens with topics like these. And maybe also having like gender and diversity focal points in organizations. Every now and then organizations can have sessions like these and just have like an open conversation, open candid conversation about the culture, what the problems are, and really take like key points from that and develop action points from there. Organizations can also make more effort to kind of create like networking opportunities, as Isha was mentioning, where women can actually network with women from other organizations and kind of like build this network. And if women, for some reason, one reason or another, are not speaking up, just making sure that there are not any constraints or impediments which are stopping them from doing so, and being a bit more proactive about this. So one things you can do, like some of the things that you can do in terms of introducing policies, but the rest of them are kind of like the softer things which fall as a part of the overall culture, where I think like the managers have to be very, very vigilant about it.
Perfect. Thank you. Just to wrap it up, I think the one advice that both of you have shared, if you're a woman, don't be afraid of like to sell yourself. You have to do it, because unless and until you're going to put yourself out there, koi aake nahi kahega ki okay, this one's great, so I think deserves a promotion. So you should definitely voice for it. And there's no need to be uncomfortable. Network करें, reach out to people on LinkedIn, explain your problem, and as soon as you start reaching out to people, you will find that there's lots of people who are very willing to help. So it's just that you have to seek out that help. And don't be afraid of doing that. Okay? And as far as the organizations are concerned, if you're a small organization and you think you can't go into all those gender and diversity policies, the least you can do is at least start having these conversations so that your team understands that this is a problem that exists and this is something that needs to be addressed. So it doesn't sort of so like you can sort of stop it from building into your culture. It's very important, because over time that is going to happen if you don't just talk about it. Bigger organizations, they do have policies in place, and I'm sure smaller organizations के पास इतनी resources ही नहीं होते कि वो dedicate करते हैं. So which is why keeping the conversation going is so important. And if you're just like 2-3 people on the team, even then talk about it. And yeah, be open to having more women on your team. You'll be surprised by their contribution, because they, like, generally I've seen there's nothing that they can't do. So even if you think that, oh, this role a woman might not be able to do it, I still think you should try and give her that opportunity. And most of the times you will be wrong in your assumption, the initial assumption that you had. But thank you so much, both of you, for joining me. I did not realize where the time went with this. And thank you to the very supportive team at Daftarkhwan for having us over. I hope everyone who was watching has had something new to learn. I certainly did. And I hope all of us can continue to keep playing our part in having this conversation over and over again, and hopefully smash this ceiling for good in due course. Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a good
Thanks for
evening.
having us.
Thank you for
Bye.
having us. Thank you.